Welcome to Twilight Fables, where we tell stories for you to sleep if you can. You grew up hearing the tale of Rapunzel as a story of golden hair, locked towers, and true love. But what if I told you the tower wasn't to protect her, but to protect you? What if the tale you thought you knew was only a veil over something far older, darker, and waiting to be remembered? Tonight, we climb those ivy-covered stones and peer through the cracks of a forgotten tale. This is Rapunzel, but not as you remember her. In a village that nestled on the edge of a dark, whispering forest, there lived a woman named Elspeth and her husband, Marek. Their small cottage stood at the end of a winding road, beside an ancient stone wall that divided their land from a desolate and long-forgotten garden. Few dared speak of the place beyond that wall, overgrown, silent, yet curiously untouched by time. Elspeth had longed for a child for years, her womb barren, despite their prayers and poultices. One spring morning, she awoke before dawn and wandered into their garden. That's when she saw it, growing through a crack in the wall. A patch of glowing dew-kissed herbs curled toward her from the other side. They weren't like anything she had ever seen before. Their leaves shimmered pale green and silver in the morning light, and a scent, sweet, beckoning, almost dizzying, drifted toward her. She knew, deep in her marrow, that this herb could cure her affliction. The villagers called it Raponticum, Rapunzel. That evening, Elspeth begged Marek to climb over the wall and fetch some. "I need it," she whispered. I can feel it. Our child is waiting." Marek hesitated. Everyone in the village knew the wall bordered the old witch's property. The crumbling house within hadn't been lived in for decades, or so it was said, yet no birds flew over that garden, and no animals crossed its bounds. But Elspeth's eyes were wild and fevered with longing, and Marek loved her more than he feared the whispers. He climbed. The garden beyond was unlike anything Marek expected. The ground pulsed slightly under his boots, as if breathing. The air hummed, and though it was night, a strange twilight cloaked the area in silver dimness. Flowers glowed faintly, not with reflected moonlight, but their own bioluminescence. He spotted the herb immediately and plucked a handful before retreating quickly, the stolen plants clenched in his fists. Elspeth boiled them into a bitter tea and drank deeply. That night, she dreamed of long staircases, coiling hair, and a voice in the dark saying, "A trade has been made." She woke pregnant. The villagers rejoiced, calling it a miracle. But Elspeth knew something had changed. She heard faint lullabies in her sleep. Her dreams were no longer her own. In the mirror, her reflection sometimes blinked too slowly, or smiled when she did not. Still, the pregnancy went smoothly. She glowed with health, And on the first night of autumn, beneath a harvest moon, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rapunzel. From the beginning, the child was strange. She barely cried, even as an infant. Her hair grew at an unnatural rate and shimmered golden blonde in moonlight. Even before her first birthday, her eyes were old, quiet, studying. Animals did not come near her. The midwife who helped deliver her never returned to the village. Her house stood abandoned for years. By the time Rapunzel turned 3, birds stopped singing near their cottage. Windows began to frost over from the inside. Marek said little, but Elspeth knew he was growing afraid. Then, one night, a knock came at their door. It was a woman in a long cloak, skin as pale as birch bark, her eyes the colour of wet ash. She was beautiful, but wrong in a way that made Elspeth's stomach turn. Behind her, the air shimmered with heat, despite the cool autumn breeze. "You took what was mine," the woman said. Elspeth's knees buckled. Marek stepped forward protectively, but the woman raised a hand. He froze in place, paralysed, not dead, not alive. A life was promised. The woman continued, "And now it must be kept. I am not without mercy. I will raise the child. She will be safe, hidden. If you interfere, there will be no more mercy." Elspeth screamed, begged, clutched her daughter close, but the woman stepped inside, as if the threshold held no power over her, reached out, and Rapunzel reached back. She left as silently as she had come, Rapunzel in her arms. Marek gasped and collapsed the moment the door closed. Elspeth chased after them barefoot, down the path, past the village's edge, through the trees, but they were gone. Only a faint trail of golden hair caught in the brambles marked the path they had taken. And so began the tale that no one would ever tell in full. The real story, buried under fairy tale gloss. The tale of the girl who wasn't stolen from her parents, but traded like coin in a pact older than time. In a tower deep in the forest, hidden from man and moon, Rapunzel was raised. Not by a witch, not by a woman, but by something else entirely. Something ancient, something hungry. The tower did not appear on any map. It was not built by men, nor carved from stone, quarried by mortal hands. It rose from the earth like a thorn, pushed through flesh, grey, crooked, impossibly tall, its sides slick with rain. Even on clear days, no birds circled it, no moss grew on its surface. The very air around it was still and heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. At its peak was a single window, narrow and arched like an eye. From that eye, a golden braid sometimes spilled down, gleaming, swaying like it moved on its own. Even when no wind blew, inside that tower, Rapunzel grew. She did not remember her parents. She did not remember the cottage with the crooked chimney, or the village with its winding roads. The woman who raised her had no name, or perhaps too many. Rapunzel once called her mother, but the word didn't sit right. It tasted of ash in her mouth. The woman never aged. Her face was always the same, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Her voice echoed even in silence. She wore dresses made of shadows, and when she moved, the room darkened. Rapunzel was told she had been born of starlight and blood, that her hair held power and her voice could call the wind, but she must never cut her hair, never sing at full voice, never look into mirrors on moonless nights. Obedience, the woman would whisper, brushing Rapunzel's golden hair with a comb made of bone. Obedience keeps you safe. Disobedience brings the others. Rapunzel did not know who the others were, only that when she asked, the air in the tower turned cold, and the shadows thickened like tar. Still, Rapunzel dreamed of escape. She would sit at her window and gaze down, watching the forest sway like a dark sea beneath her. She imagined what it would feel like to run barefoot through the trees, to taste fruit not brought in a silver bowl, to laugh without feeling watched. Her hair was impossibly long now, heavy like a second spine. When she brushed it, it whispered. When she slept, it moved, sometimes coiling around her limbs like vines. The woman would braid it tightly, whispering runes between her teeth, then leave through the window, never the door. Rapunzel never saw how she descended, only that the braid would vanish over the edge, and the tower would creak like it sighed when the woman was gone. The tower was full of doors, but none opened. Every room looked the same, bare stone, a mirror nailed shut, a single candle that never burned down. Time didn't move normally. Sometimes Rapunzel would sleep and wake to find days had passed, or none at all. On her 16th year, she knew the number only because the woman told her so. Something changed. That night, the tower groaned louder than usual. Rapunzel heard voices in the walls, whispers in a language she didn't understand, but felt in her bones. Her dreams were full of falling, of hair stretching endlessly into the void, of a spindle turning blood into thread. When she woke, the woman was already standing at the foot of her bed. "Someone has entered the forest," she said, her eyes black and wide. A prince. The word meant nothing to Rapunzel, but the way the woman said it, like it was filth, made her skin crawl. "He is looking for the tower," she continued. "They always do, but this one carries something with him." She didn't explain what, only that Rapunzel was to remain silent, not speak, not sing, not answer the prince's calls. But Rapunzel was tired of obedience. That night, when the candle burned low and the stars blinked outside her window, she heard it. "Hello!" A voice, muffled by distance, warm and uncertain. "Is someone up there?" She knew she should stay silent. She knew the rules, but her voice moved on its own. "Yes, she whispered. A pause. "I thought I saw your hair. Are you all right?" She leaned over the windowsill. Far below, through the dark, she saw a figure holding a lantern, not dressed like the village boys she saw in the dreams, not her own. This one was robed in velvet and steel, with a sword at his side and concern in his voice. "I'm fine," she called softly. Her voice wavered. She had never spoken to anyone but the woman, never anyone who wasn't made of shadows and cold. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Are you trapped?" "Yes," she said, and felt something flutter in her chest. "I can let down my hair if you climb it." It sounded absurd, even as she said it, yet she had watched the woman do it many times. She unbraided the golden rope. It moved eagerly, uncoiling like it wanted to taste the ground. She lowered it over the edge. The prince climbed. He reached the window with effort, his hands bloodied from gripping the impossible length of hair. When he finally pulled himself inside, panting and wide-eyed, he froze. You're beautiful," he said. Rapunzel stared at him. He smelled of sweat and pine. His presence was loud and alive. It overwhelmed her senses. She reached out, and before she could stop herself, touched his face. Something shifted. The tower groaned again, louder this time. The walls trembled. The candle flickered violently. The shadows grew long and snarled. "You have to go," Rapunzel whispered suddenly, panic blooming. "She'll be back. She'll know." But it was too late. A chill washed over them. And then the door, the one that had never opened, creaked. And from the darkness beyond it came a voice that scraped across the walls like claws. "You disobeyed." Comme si. The prince turned toward the sound. He was brave. Rapunzel could see that, in the way he stood between her and the door. But bravery meant little in that moment. The tower itself exhaled. The stone shuddered. The air grew thick and wet, as though they stood at the bottom of a well. The door, the one that had never so much as trembled in her presence, groaned fully open now, not with the creak of hinges, but a fleshy, wet squelch that made the prince's sword hand tremble. From the blackness stepped the woman, not as she had been. Her form writhed at the edges, indistinct and roiling like a mirage. Her face flickered, beautiful one moment, rotten the next. Her hands were too long, her nails glinting like obsidian hooks, and when she smiled, her teeth were sharp enough to cut sound itself. Rapunzel backed against the far wall. "You invited a stranger into your sanctum," the woman said, her voice echoing from all corners of the tower. "You spoke to him, touched him." She turned to the prince. "And you, little scrap of royalty, you brought a name into my house. You think you know who you are, but names are old things, and yours is borrowed." The prince drew his sword. "You're a witch." "No," the woman hissed, stepping into the flickering candlelight. Her shadow stretched like a whip across the stone floor. Witches are born. I was made, sewn together from bone and breath, and the regrets of mothers who gave their daughters away too easily. Rapunzel felt her legs weaken. The candle sputtered. The golden braid, still dangling from the window, began to rise, slithering like a serpent, coiling back into the tower with a speed that made her heart hammer. It wound itself around her ankles, up her legs, her torso, her throat. Rapunzel, the woman crooned. You forgot the most important lesson. I didn't. Rapunzel tried to speak, but the braid tightened. Obedience, the woman whispered. You disobeyed, so now you must remember. The prince stepped forward, raising his sword. Let her go. The woman smiled, and the walls bled. Cracks split the stone, dark and wet, oozing something that smelled like rust and grief. The mirror nailed to the wall trembled. A face swam in its depths. Not Rapunzel's, not the prince's. Something older, eyeless, watching. The prince lunged, too fast, too loud, too mortal. The woman raised one hand. Her fingers flicked like she was brushing dust from the air, and the prince flew backward, striking the far wall with a sound like breaking bone. His sword clattered to the floor, skittering toward Rapunzel's feet. No, she whispered, struggling against her own hair. Please. The woman knelt beside her, gently stroking her cheek. You are not like them, she murmured. You are made of magic and marrow. Do you remember what you were before the tower? No, I saved you, I shaped you, and now you will be quiet. I want to leave, Rapunzel rasped. I want to be free. The woman's smile withered. You don't understand. The world outside. She gestured toward the window. It will devour you. Your voice will summon things worse than I. Your hair will be hunted. You will be caged in iron, dissected by men who call themselves scholars. She stood. And this one? She sneered at the prince, who was groaning on the floor. He doesn't want you. He wants a story, a conquest. That's not true. The prince coughed. I came to save her. Save? The woman laughed. You think you're the first to climb that braid? She's had 100 saviors. They all bleed the same. She stepped over to him. You're lucky, she whispered. You won't remember this. None of them do. She raised her hand again. No! Rapunzel screamed, and something inside her snapped. Not her bones, not her spirit. Something older, something buried. Her mouth opened, not to speak, but to sing. A sound rose from her throat, not a melody, but a resonance. It hummed in the stones. It peeled the shadow from the walls. It made the mirror scream. Her braid burst into flame, the fire trailing through the tower like a whip, igniting the air. The woman reeled back. No, no, you don't know what you're doing. Rapunzel sang louder. The tower cracked. The candle shattered. The braid fell limp. And the woman, no longer beautiful, no longer ageless, began to unravel. Her skin peeled like paper. revealing the bones beneath. Her eyes melted, her voice shrieked in every pitch at once. "You ungrateful thing! You were mine, you!" And then silence. Ash floated in the air. The prince coughed, sitting upright, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You!" Rapunzel fell to her knees, the last note of her song still vibrating in the stone. "I don't know what I did," she whispered. The tower began to tremble again, but not in rage, in collapse. The stones shook loose from the walls, the mirror shattered completely, the window cracked from top to bottom, the room filled with dust and light, real light, sunlight, for the first time in years. "Come on," the prince shouted, grabbing Rapunzel's hand. They ran, not downstairs, the tower had none, but through a hallway that hadn't existed before, a tunnel of stone and root and light. As they ran, the tower behind them groaned, then screamed, then collapsed in on itself like a throat closing. They burst into the forest, into the living world, trees, wind, leaves, sound. Rapunzel stopped, gasping. It was too much, too loud, too real. The prince watched her. "Are you all right?" She shook her head. "I don't know what I am." The forest was not kind. Sunlight flickered in patches, more illusion than warmth. Its rays tangled in twisted branches above, as if the trees themselves conspired to keep the light out. The prince led the way, glancing back every few steps to make sure Rapunzel followed, but her gaze was far off, locked somewhere behind her eyes. Each step she took felt unreal, dirt beneath her feet, air that moved, scents she couldn't name, not perfume and candle wax, but rot and moss, and the faint, coppery tang of blood hidden beneath the soil. The tower had been a cage, yes, but this world was a moor. "How far are we from the village?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the crunch of leaves. 2 days' ride, the prince said. "If we head west, we can reach the border by..." Rapunzel froze. Something moved, not ahead, below. "Wait," she said. The prince turned. "What is it?" The ground beneath them pulsed, just once, as if a heart had beat beneath the earth. "Did you feel that?" "No," he said slowly, but she had. She knelt, pressing her palm to the moss, cold at first, but then warmth bloomed, sickly and wet. She recoiled, but not before she heard it. A voice, not words, but something like a lullaby sung in reverse. The prince offered his hand. "Let's keep moving." She hesitated. There's something wrong with the ground. He helped her up. "We're still too close to the tower's ruin. It's probably just the magic unravelling." But Rapunzel knew better. Magic did not unravel. It lingered, it fed, and something had taken root. By nightfall, they found a clearing. A ring of mushrooms circled a flat patch of moss, and though it was unnatural, the prince insisted they rest. Rapunzel sat with her back against a tree, watching shadows gather between the trunks. No fire. He said it would draw attention. She wasn't sure from what. She dreamt again, not of the tower, but of a spindle, a finger pricked, blood dripping down golden hair like candle wax. She woke, gasping. The prince was gone. "Hello," she called out, clutching her cloak. Her hair, now cut to shoulder length, still tingled with unnatural energy. She followed the faint sound of water through the trees. Then she saw him, kneeling beside a stream, speaking softly, not in his voice, in hers, the woman's. Rapunzel stepped closer. "What are you doing?" The prince turned. His eyes were black, not like night, like void, and in his reflection on the stream, she saw not his face, but the woman's. "You left too soon," the reflection hissed. "The binding was not undone. You tore a hole, and now we will crawl through it." Rapunzel ran. Branches tore at her skin. Her lungs burned. Behind her, the prince's footsteps gave chase, but they sounded heavier now, bornier, like claws on bark. She didn't dare look back. She burst through another ring of mushrooms, and the world changed. Silence, not peace, not rest, but absence. The forest no longer felt alive. It felt hollow. Rapunzel stumbled into a small glade. A tree stood in its centre, broad and ancient, bark spiralling like ribs. Something about it pulled at her, made her hair rise. A voice came from behind it, familiar. "You don't remember, do you?" Rapunzel circled the trunk. A girl sat on a root, no older than 10, her face half-shadowed. She wore a crown of thorns, and her feet were bare. "Who are you?" Rapunzel asked. The girl looked up. She had Rapunzel's eyes. "I'm what you were before the tower," the girl said. "Before she shaped you. That's not possible. She found us in the hollow, in the cradle of root and rot. We were not human then, not fully. We had no name. She gave us one, and in return, we gave her our voice." "No," Rapunzel said. I'm not her." "You're not," the girl said gently, "but she left pieces in you." Rapunzel sank to her knees. "What do I do?" The girl stood. "She's not dead, only scattered, and every time you speak, she listens. Every time you sing, she awakens." She reached out and pressed something into Rapunzel's palm. It was a spindle, but its needle was made of bone. "She can only be bound through blood," the girl said. "Yours." Rapunzel looked down. When she looked back up, the girl was gone, and the glade had begun to whisper. "Rapunzel." Not a threat, a summons. The trees leaned in, and the forest remembered her name. Rapunzel walked without knowing where her feet carried her. The spindle, bone white and humming faintly in her grasp, felt heavier with each step. The forest had fallen into silence again, but not the comforting kind. It was a silence that pressed inward, like something holding its breath, waiting. Her name echoed, sometimes near, sometimes far, like a memory being repeated by something that had never been human. She stumbled across another ring of mushrooms, third one, and this one was incomplete. The break in the circle was deliberate. Roots had been cut with precision, and within the gap stood a cairn of stones, stacked high with dried flowers scattered around its base. Something marked it, a sigil made of hair knotted into a star. Rapunzel touched it gently. A voice spoke behind her. Not all of us forget. She turned. It was the prince, or no, it wore his face, but there was something in the way he stood, too tall, too still. His mouth smiled, but his eyes did not. "You're not him," she whispered. "I was," the thing said, "but he's in pieces now, broken open by what you brought out of the tower." "I didn't mean to." "You never mean to." The forest darkened, the canopy thickening overhead as the light dimmed unnaturally. You left the gate open. You let her slip through. Rapunzel gripped the spindle tighter. "Where is he?" The thing tilted its head. "He screamed for you when the roots pulled him under, called you by name until the end." Something inside Rapunzel snapped. She stepped forward. "She used me, lied to me, but I won't let her have anything else." The thing's mouth twisted. "You think this is about her?" It lunged. She drove the spindle forward, blindly, without thought, its bone tips sinking deep into the thing's chest. For a moment, there was silence. Then it screamed, not in pain, but in release. The voice that poured from its mouth was not the prince's, not even the woman's. It was older, hungrier. Words in no tongue Rapunzel knew. The forest convulsed around them. The trees bled sap as black as pitch. The mushrooms burst like blisters, releasing a mist that swirled around the thing's unravelling form. And then it was gone. No body, no blood, just soil, stirred, and the spindle, now pulsing with heat in Rapunzel's palm. She fell to her knees, the sound of her breath loud in her ears, but even louder was the silence that followed, and the sound of something waking. When she came to, the glade had shifted, the cairn had toppled, and across the mossy floor, symbols had been burned into the ground, circles within circles, all centred around a wide black pit that hadn't been there before. She crawled to the edge. It was not a hole, it was a throat. Roots spiralled down like a gullet. Breath came from its depths, cold and moist, carrying with it the scent of old flowers and fresh graves. And from far below, a lullaby began, the same one the woman had sung to her in the tower, but not her voice. Many voices, layered, discordant. Children, mothers, old men, weeping. The spindle pulsed again, and Rapunzel knew this was the hollow, the true origin of her hair, her voice, her power. The tower had merely been a cage to hide her from it, a barrier, a lock, and she had picked it clean. She stood at the edge for what felt like hours, the lullaby twisting her mind. Memories resurfaced. Times the woman had spoken to her in riddles. Times she'd brushed her hair while whispering words Rapunzel hadn't understood, but had always remembered. She planted you like a seed, the voice had once said. You grew tall, you bore fruit, and now the grove calls. She backed away, the spindle burned in her hand, the bone cracking under heat, and she dropped it, but it didn't fall. It hovered, spun slowly, and from the tip a single drop of blood formed. Not hers, not yet. It was waiting. As she turned to flee, something rose from the pit. Not a creature, not a form, a presence. It filled the clearing like fog, grey, whispering, faceless. Tendrils of it reached toward her, brushing her skin without touching it, and in its wake, trees split open. Inside their trunks, faces, dozens, each murmuring her name. Rapunzel. Some were weeping, some smiling, some stitched shut. The forest was her garden, and the tower had been the gate. She ran again, through roots that tried to trip her, past stones that shifted underfoot. The forest blurred, time unspooling, until she found herself back at the stream. But it was different now. Black water, still as glass, and the reflection she saw, not her own, the woman, hair white as salt, eyes empty sockets, lips sewn shut. She reached up, trembling, and touched the surface of the water. It bled. A ripple spread out from her fingers, and the reflection smiled, not with joy, but satisfaction. You are almost ready, the wind whispered. Rapunzel turned from the stream and began to walk again. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop, because something in her hair had begun to twitch, like it remembered where it came from, and wanted to go home. Rapunzel walked until the trees began to whisper in a language she nearly understood. Their limbs leaned together like under old crones conspiring, branches brushing above her in soft clicks that resembled speech. The deeper she went, the more her hair reacted, threading through bramble and bark, as if it had a mind of its own. She tried to tie it, to tame it, but the more she resisted, the more it slithered and tightened, pulling her gently but insistently forward. It wasn't just growing, it was reaching. The trees grew too close together for paths now. Roots jutted from the earth like bones from a corpse. At times, she crawled. At others, she had to climb over twisted masses that felt more like the backs of creatures than plants. There were faces in the bark, some clear, some warped, mouths open in silent screams, eyes gouged by time, and somewhere behind her, always just a few steps behind, something followed. She never saw it, but she knew it was there. At dusk, the air grew heavier. She found a clearing, lined with blackened rose bushes, thorns thick as needles. In the centre stood a well. Its stones were slick, covered in a sheen of moss and dark ichor. But it wasn't the well itself that drew her breath away. It was what hung above it, a figure, upside down, spun tightly in golden hair. Its face was veiled, features obscured, but the body was unmistakably female, limbs too long and limp, as though every bone had been removed. A spindle jutted from her chest, not bone, iron, old and rusted. The woman's mouth hung open in a scream, frozen by time, lips cracked and bleeding around something that glimmered. Glass? A shard of mirror? Rapunzel stepped closer. The woman opened her eyes. They were hers. She stumbled back, but roots curled around her ankles. Not to restrain, to guide. They nudged her toward the well, like a child being shown her crib. The figure writhed above, hair snapped, and the woman fell. But before she hit the stones, the hair unravelled mid-air, and she dissolved into dust, scattering across the ground like ash in wind. What remained was the iron spindle. Rapunzel picked it up, cold, so cold it made her teeth ache. The symbols carved into its side were the same ones she had found on the cairns, knotted into the sigils made of hair, burned into the forest floor. A name was carved in a tongue she didn't know but could now read. Iskra. It meant nothing, and yet everything. The iron hummed in her hand, and behind her something moved. She turned. A small child stood at the forest's edge, hairless, eyes like moths, wide, lidless, and pale. It didn't speak, but it pointed toward the trees, toward a path that hadn't been there before. As she stepped into it, the child turned to dust. The path twisted, unnatural. Sometimes she walked upward, sometimes downward, sometimes sideways. The laws of nature didn't apply here. The sky, when visible, showed a blood-red moon swollen beyond proportion. The air vibrated with whispers, and the trees, they began to move, not swaying, not shaking, moving, dragging their roots, following her. Their mouths opened, and she heard lullabies, not her own, ones from before her time. She passed stone markers, etched with warnings. Do not look back. Your shadow is no longer yours. She waits behind the veil. She passed dolls hanging from branches by their hair. Each one had its eyes gouged and replaced with thorns. She recognized one of the dolls. It had her old tower dress. Another wore the prince's sash. Another, the woman's brooch. All of them slowly turned to face her as she passed, and as the wind picked up, they began to whisper in a single voice, "You were never the girl in the tower." She began to remember, not flashes, but full recollections, fragments sewn into her, with lies now unravelling. There had been other girls, other towers. She wasn't the first. She was the latest, the most fertile, and the most obedient. Until now. The woman hadn't kept her because she loved her. She kept her because she was ripe, for blooming or for feeding. The iron spindle began to grow warm in her hand. She felt it whispering, urging, a direction, a choice. She reached a fork in the path. To the left, the air glowed faintly green. The trees leaned apart, and she could hear birdsong, normal, gentle, sweet, something safe. To the right, the path narrowed. The ground bled where it was walked. Shadows moved even without light. The spindle pulsed toward the right. And so she turned left. She didn't get far. The path twisted upon itself like a serpent swallowing its tail. She walked for hours, but when she reached the clearing, it was the same one with the well, the same iron spindle on the ground, the same hair-wrapped corpse above it, a loop, a trap. The forest would not let her cheat, so she took the right path, and immediately it hurt. The air scratched her throat. Every step forward peeled something invisible from her skin, layers of innocence perhaps, or protection. She saw a girl in the distance, sitting among mushrooms. She wore a crown made of teeth and was brushing her long black hair with a comb made of fingers. When Rapunzel approached, the girl looked up. It was herself, younger, unsullied. "Why did you leave me here?" the girl asked. "I didn't mean to." "You always mean to," the girl echoed the forest. And then she began to sing the same lullaby. Her voice cracked, hollow. From her mouth, spiders spilled. They crawled up Rapunzel's arms, into her ears, her hair, her nose. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She listened. And as the song ended, the girl crumbled. What remained were bones and a comb, not made of fingers, but now carved from her own hair. Rapunzel picked it up. It was warm, and in its teeth were strands of someone else's golden locks. She walked deeper, through bark that bled memories. She saw herself at 7, brushing her hair for hours, crying because it tangled with thorns she didn't remember picking. She saw the prince kneeling with blood pouring from his mouth, whispering, "She's behind you." She saw the woman braiding her hair and humming with tears in her eyes. And above it all, in the canopy, something enormous shifted. She caught glimpses through the leaves, eyes, many, watching, blossoming. She stepped into a final clearing, and there, at its centre, stood a door, freestanding, black, tall as the trees. Her hair reached toward it, and from the cracks around its edges, wind blew that smelled like dust and secrets. A handle of bone. She touched it, and everything stopped. Even the trees held their breath. The bone handle was warm, not with heat, but with pulse. It beat like a heart. Rapunzel hesitated, but the wind curling from beneath the door carried her name in whispers, echoed in her own voice, then layered with others, older voices, familiar, though she'd never heard them aloud. When she pulled the door open, there was no room behind it, only dark, a dark so total it seemed to drink the air, devour her thoughts, erase even the idea of light. She stepped through and fell. There was no ground, no sky, only the sensation of descending, weightless and slow. her hair dragging behind like the roots of a dying tree. Somewhere far below, bells rang, not chimes, funeral bells, and then light, faint, blue, cold. She landed in a room of mirrors. Each one showed a version of her, one tall and regal, dressed in bone-lace silk, with blood at the corners of her mouth. One broken, eyes missing, crawling on hands flayed of skin. One screaming, one smiling with too many teeth. They all looked at her. Some reached forward. The mirrors cracked. She ran. The hall had no walls, only mirrors, endless, reflecting not only her, but the memories of others, girls, with different hair, eyes, skin, but the same face beneath it all, her face. She began to understand. Rapunzel wasn't her name. It was a title, a role, one passed from girl to girl, through tower to tower, across ages. Some were taken at birth, others lured into the woods, all of them trapped, fed, braided, harvested. She stopped running when she saw the spindle again, but this time it floated in the air, turning, threading her own hair into itself, and on the thread, faces, tiny silent mouths moving. She reached for it, and it pierced her palm. No blood came. Instead, hair grew from the wound, golden, then grey, then black, changing, living. The hair slithered up her arm, curling around her shoulders, tightening like vines. It whispered, "She is awake." The mirrors shattered, not all at once, but in sequence, like dominoes of glass, and from each one crawled something, not reflections, but remnants, figures hunched, hairless, eyeless. They wept not tears, but strands of gold, pulled from mouths as if choking. They circled her, bowed, then opened a path. At its end was a staircase, spiralling down into soil. The walls were made of plaits of hair, tight, unbreakable. Each step she took, the air grew warmer, not hot, but ripe, with rot. At the bottom was a cradle, not for a child, for her. Inside it was a husk, a version of her, mouth sewn shut, hair cut short, fingernails bloody from clawing at the weave. The husk opened its eyes. "You were never meant to leave." And yet I did. And now we all return. The husk reached up. Its hands merged with hers, skin to skin. And she felt it, them, the ones before, all of them within her, waiting, sleeping, until now. The ground trembled, hair split the floor, not hers, older, rooted deeper than the world. It grew rapidly, forming a new tower around her, stone by stone, hair by hair, a spiral cage. But she didn't resist. She walked the spiral, upward, toward the top. The cradle below became a grave. The husk inside curled and wept. Above, the final room waited, and inside it, her, the woman. But she was different, taller, hairless, skin covered in scars shaped like braids. Her eyes were burned out, but still saw. "Child," the woman said, voice wet with moss and mourning, "you were never meant to wake up." Rapunzel stepped forward. "I know. You were meant to grow, not to be." "I remember." The woman reached for the spindle, but Rapunzel already held it. Iron gleamed in the dark, and the forest fell silent. "I fed you stories," the woman said. "Fairy tales to keep you dreaming. I'm awake now. You'll regret that." "I already do." They stood in silence, and then the woman smiled. Her teeth were threads, her tongue a needle. She opened her mouth and began to sew the world back together with her voice. Reality bent, stone folded in, hair reached. Rapunzel lifted the spindle and plunged it into her own chest, not to die, but to anchor. The forest screamed, the tower cracked, and time stopped, just for a breath. When it resumed, the woman was gone, only ash, and behind her, a door, different from before. This one was carved from her own hair. It opened not into dark, but into memory. A field, a cottage, a child crying. She stepped through and closed it behind her. She was not free, but she was not caged. She was something else. The final Rapunzel, the last thread. And somewhere far away, a girl with long black hair looked up from a cradle. Her mother sang a lullaby of towers and tangles, and a shadow moved through the mirror.